New year, new map pool, and the VCT Sao Paulo lock-in tournament. While usually it takes time for a new map to get played regularly by the pros because it's new. You don't really know what you're doing with it. We actually saw two Lotus games in the same day on day 2. First matchup was FPX versus KCorp. The second one was Cloud9 versus Paper Rex. And so I wanted to look at both of these maps, both of these matches, and see what we can't learn about how Lotus is being approached by the pro teams. What's interesting that you'll notice right off the bat just by looking at the agent compositions is that in the different matchups there is a parallel approach. FPX versus KCorp, both of them had a Viper KJ, whereas Cloud9 versus Paper Rex both had a Chamber with a dual each also had a duelist, and they each also had a sort of flex sentry, where Leaf was playing Cypher, and Benkai was playing Sage on the side of PRX. First things first, though, before we go into the agent compositions, quick little note on the setup. This shouldn't be that much of a surprise when you just look at the layout of the map that we're seeing heavy emphasis on attack and defense onto the A side. It is just so wide, it's so big, you can actually get some sort of poking and prodding done there, whereas B and C, because they're so tight, and unlike Haven, which also has 3 sites, but it has like that straight shot from window into B, it's very maze-like. So if you're an attacker, you're not really teasing, you're not really testing, you're either just like going into the site or you're not. Mounds outside of C is sort of like this halfway house, similar to the approach to A on Haven. But even then, it's still mostly A focused in the very opening moments of a round, unless you're seeing a rush towards either of the other 2 sites. And so because of that, sometimes it's a going left to right, CB to A. Sometimes it's a 1-1-2. Sometimes it's a 1-2-2. I like to actually think of it more of as a 1.5, 2.5, because the defenders especially can have that flex rotator at A link or even A stairs into B upper. 2 players, 3 players there. So really, you're not going to see like a 1-0-4 where it's all 4 members onto the A side. It's going to be like 1 or 2 of those members, probably 2 of those agents, are going to have like 1 foot in each, even if the initial conflict is generally outside A around root or rubble. And sometimes you'll even see B be left completely open just because of the connections that C and A have to quickly retake that site. Looking at the agents themselves now, because we have such a small sample size, I don't know how much of a difference there is between Killjoy Sage and Cypher. That is likely more up to personal preference, particularly within the Cypher and the KJ. Sage is certainly off on her own little island in terms of her approach and what she can do. But between Cypher and Killjoy, that's likely just going to be up to personal preference and what the rest of your team is better at playing off of. But now let's talk about Viper versus Chamber. I want to talk about Viper first because that was it was the first one that we saw. So it's first on my list of notes. It is very interesting, the 2 different teams, how they approached with the Viper, because they were similar in a lot of ways, but they diverged at certain points. So let me just walk you through what FPX did on their attack and defense side, and then I'll do KCorp next. So FPX on the attack side, they very much focused their Viper wall on A exclusively. So did KCorp, but like Viper did as well. They had a couple of different lines. They had one that went from A lobby, cut through B, not through B, but it cut off the entrances to B from the east side. But they also had one that split A main right down the middle, which meant that they could either loop in the left side and cut off the A rotation, or they could, more likely what they did was they cut off stairs and cut off A link and went in through the doors onto the A site. You also saw them play around a small little pocket around root, which was one of their multiple ways to try and take control of rubble, because they very much prioritized a rubble on both attack and defense. And speaking of defense, on the defensive side, they continued to play their Viper wall onto the A side of things. They really like to play the wall through rubble and like very deep into rubble as a very aggressive wall, in the sense that they played for that area consistently. FPX played incredibly aggressively off the back of that Viper wall to give them that space, and they didn't want to let any of the attackers in past lobby. They would fight for it almost every single time. In fact, this aggression is shown even outside of A main, where if nothing happened, A or otherwise, whether they're on eco or not, you would often see them push through B, push through C, just being very impatient. This was, I think, one of the reasons why KCorp was able to dismantle them when they were on the attacking side, because they just waited for an opening and exploited it. We didn't get much to see KCorp's attacking strategy because of that. They didn't really need to do anything. They just had to wait for FPX to slip up. And FPX, I imagine because this was their first major showing on a stage up against these veteran players, especially looking at Scream, who's been in the FPS competitive scene for years at this point, it probably caused a lot of jitters and over egging the pudding. And actually, because of that, I am disappointed that we didn't get to see a lot of KCorp's attacking strategies, because they were the one of these two teams, they actually had their attacking Viper wall cutting in through C, but we didn't really get to see that utilized a lot. But when KCorp was on defense, they again prioritized A control with their Viper wall. They had two different main setups with it, two main angles coming from around the same spot. One of them was again playing for rubble, but the other one was a little further back and actually cut off where A main splits into A doors. So a bit more of a defensive setup. They gave some space. They would give some space to FPX. But unsurprisingly, the Viper approach is the same as Viper always does, which is essentially hurting your opponents and controlling where they're able to comfortably fight. Whereas Chamber, on the other hand, is more for control by just pure elimination. And in the Cloud9 versus Paper Rex matchup, you saw the Chambers do essentially the same thing when they're on attack and defense. The attacking for both of them, it's all about playing from lobby, trying to get a pick down A main, and then snapping back into safety of deep lobby. And on the defending side, playing in from C, peeking out for mounds, and then snapping back into the C site, whether you get a pick or not. And even though Chamber has been nerfed to the ground and is not nearly as dominant as he was in the main Chamber meta, because of the maze structure of this map, it meant that you don't actually need to be able to snap that far away. Like, especially when you're just focusing on the big, deep lanes of A main and then Mound, which is also pretty deep itself. But more importantly, I think Mound on the defensive side is because you can just leave one person on C. There's only one real main entrance. And so information wise, you're not having to cover too many angles, and so you can leave a single unit there, single agent there, and he just snaps around the corner to waterfall, or maybe still onto the C site. But there are a couple of different hiding places. You don't need to be able to teleport far for Chamber to be able to hold that angle safely. And again, because of the A side, it's so deep and it is so contested, having the possibility to try and get an opening pick there is incredibly useful, whether it's with a Tour de Force or whatever, a regular gun or an ability or whatever it is. Just get out there, try and take an aggressive peek, and then snap back. However, what you gain in firepower from a Chamber, you lack in smokes and control and area denial and site denial and information denial. And so because of that, both of these teams also used a duelist. Granted, they're not like Jet or Reyna duelists. It's Zelsis on the Neon and Jing on the Rays, which are more of like space crew. I mean, all duelists are space creation duelists, but these are definitely probably the least duelisty. And I think the way that Zelsis used Neon especially is a good example of why a duelist like this is required for a Chamber, if you have a Chamber, because you're missing those smokes. Sometimes, like, there are a couple examples when they would take a site on the attack, and then Zelsis would actually swing through the site and actually try and take more space, take more ground. And so even though Zelsis ended the series negative, he was incredibly useful in terms of trying to gain as much space as possible, see what's free, take all of it, really lock off the angles of approach that the retake can come on in. And on the attacking side, Zelsis was definitely focused on A 100%. He was the main point of that spear of them pushing down to try and contest rubble a little bit. Now, Jing on the Rays wasn't so much, I'm going to run and see where they are and you guys trade me. Definitely tried to carry the team with the kills. So as far as seeing any other duelist played on this map, I don't see a particular reason, at least within these approaches, the Chamber and the Viper approaches. It's possible always that there's going to be another composition that comes out that just breaks the meta. But I don't think that there's a huge desire or a necessity for someone like a Reyna or a Jet. I don't know if we're going to be seeing much more Lotus this event. Usually a new map, teams are resistant to play it because they're not as experienced on it. It's a bit more of a Wild West, a little bit more, not random, but unreliable until you get a number of practice rounds in. But hey, it's a 32 team tournament. We still have a lot more to go. We still have the entirety of Group B to go through. So I imagine we'll see it there. I think it would be interesting if we see Cloud9 and KCorp, as an example, go up against each other to get that Viper and Chamber approach. Get those facing off directly. And either way, I don't think this is the end development of the map. The meta of Lotus is going to be going through a couple of different iterations as we move on anyway, but this is just a first look, and I'm interested to see where it will evolve to from here. As always, remember to like, subscribe, and I will see you next video.